The crash of glass and the thud of a body hitting the saloon floor was the only signal Clara needed. She had been waiting by the back door for an hour. Her breath held so tight her lungs burned. It was Saturday night in Silverknife Gulch, the air thick with the smell of cheap whiskey, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of fresh dug ore. The brawl had started, as it always did, over a card game or a girl. This time, the girl was her. She did not wait to hear the man's curse. She ripped the flimsy latch from the rotted wood frame and plunged into the alley. The cold hit her like a fist. She wore only the thin, torn chemise she'd been forced to serve drinks in, a garment that offered no protection against the high Montana night. Gravel and filth sliced into the soles of her feet. She ran. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to get away from the sound of the tinny piano and the guttural laughter of the men inside the gilded cage. She ran past the assay office, past the dark shape of the livery, and toward the black, jagged line of the hills that ringed the mining camp. A shot cracked the air, followed by a drunken yell. "The little witch is running!" Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her body, giving her a strength she did not possess. She scrambled up the first incline, her hands raw as she clawed at rock and scrub pine. She was bleeding. She could feel the warm stickiness on her shoulder where the madam's brute, Silas, had grabbed her, his fingers digging in like talons. She could feel the sting of a dozen other cuts from the alley. Her body was a map of pain, but the fear was worse. She ran until her lungs were fire and her legs were water. The sounds of Silverknife Gulch faded, replaced by the howl of the wind whistling down from the peaks. She was barefoot, freezing, and running blind into a wilderness that killed men far better equipped than her. Delirium was already setting in, born of fever and the beating she had taken earlier in the day. The ground swam before her eyes, the stars blurring into cold streaks of light. She stumbled, fell, rose, and stumbled again, driven by the one primal thought, away. Days lost their meaning. The sun was a dull ache in a white sky. The night was a void of crushing cold. She found a trickle of water and drank until she vomited, her body rejecting even that. She chewed on pine needles, the bitter taste coating her tongue. The fever grew, wrapping her in a thick, confusing fog. The pain in her shoulder had become a deep, throbbing sickness that spread down her arm. She vaguely remembered a different sound, a sharp crack during the brawl, a stinging impact just before she fled. She was following a dry creek bed when her legs finally gave out. She pitched forward, rolling down a short, rocky incline. She came to rest in a shallow ravine, sheltered from the wind but not from the cold. She tried to move, to crawl, but her body was done. She lay on the frozen earth, her breathing shallow, her eyes half closed. She was so cold she had stopped shivering. Above her, the sky was a perfect, merciless blue. A shadow passed over her, then another. She managed to lift her head. Vultures, 3 of them, circling in a slow, patient spiral. They knew she was not dead yet, but they also knew she would be soon. She closed her eyes. Levi Hayes saw the birds first. He had been pushing his horse, Roan, for 2 days, eager to get back to the silence of his homestead. The cattle delivery to Fort Benton had been profitable, but the noise of the settlement grated on him. He preferred the company of the wind and the mountains. The vultures told a story of death, likely a deer or a wolf caught in a trap. He was 20 yards past when instinct, a honed and unwelcome survival skill, made him pull up. The birds were too low, too concentrated, for a simple carcass. He dismounted, his rifle in his hand before his feet hit the ground. He moved with a quiet economy of motion, his eyes scanning the terrain. He had seen too much death to be curious about it, but the land demanded respect. You did not ignore its signs. He crested the small rise and looked down into the ravine. It was not a deer. It was a woman, or what was left of one, a tangle of matted hair, pale skin, and rags. He swore, a low, harsh sound swallowed by the wind. He slid down the embankment, his boots scattering stones. She was alive, barely. Her lips were blue, her skin covered in a sheen of feverish sweat despite the freezing air. She was a ruin of cuts, bruises, and filth. He saw the angry, puckered wound on her shoulder. It was dark, inflamed, and oozed sickness. It was a bullet hole. For a moment, Levi considered leaving her. He had his own ghosts. He did not need to invite more. This woman was trouble. She was from a town, and town trouble was the worst kind. He looked up at the circling birds. He looked down at her face, hollow-eyed and smeared with dirt, looking impossibly young. He remembered another face, pale in the moonlight, consumed by flames. "Damn it," he whispered. He was gentle, but he was not slow. He holstered his rifle and shrugged out of his heavy wool coat. He wrapped her in it, lifting her from the ground. She weighed almost nothing. She moaned, a sound like a trapped animal, but did not wake. He carried her back to his horse, mounted, and settled her in front of him, cradled against his chest. It was hours back to his cabin, and she likely would not live to see it, but he could not leave her for the vultures. The ride was a blur of misery for Clara, a disjointed nightmare of movement and agonizing pain. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the warmth of the horse beneath her and the solid wall of a man's chest behind her. She was terrified, but too weak to fight. Levi's cabin was little more than a single, sturdy room built of thick-cut pine, set deep in a fold of the hills, miles from any trail. It was isolated, defensible, and quiet. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, laying her on his own cot. He stoked the embers in the hearth until a fire blazed, heating a kettle of water. He worked with a grim efficiency. He cut away the rags of her chemise, his face set like stone. He was careful, his hands surprisingly steady as he washed the grime from her skin, revealing the true extent of the damage. The bruises were deep and black, clustered on her ribs and face. The bullet hole was angry. The slug was still in there. She woke when the whiskey he used to clean the wound touched the raw flesh. A scream, thin and dry, tore from her throat. Her eyes flew open, wide with animal terror. She tried to scramble away, her hands clawing at the blankets. "Hold still," Levi said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel. "The bullet's got to come out." "No," she whispered, sobbing. "Please, no, don't. I'll be good. I will." Levi froze. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and understood. He had not just found a woman who had been shot. He had found a woman who had been broken. He set the whiskey and the knife down. He backed away from the cot, holding his hands up, palms out. "I am not one of them," he said, his voice flat. "I am not going to touch you." She stared at him, her breath hitching, her mind unable to process the words. He was not touching her. He was not hurting her. He was standing by the fire, his back to her. "The bullet is poisoning you," he said, his voice clipped. "If it stays, you die by morning. I will take it out. That is all. Then I will leave you be." She did not answer, only trembled. He took her silence as assent. He turned back, his movements precise. He gave her a strip of leather to bite down on. "This will hurt." She cried out when the knife went in, the sound muffled by the leather. Levi worked fast, his jaw tight. He did not flinch, his focus entirely on the task. He probed the torn muscle, found the flattened piece of lead, and pulled it free, dropping it with a tink into a metal basin. He packed the wound with a poultice of herbs he kept for his horse, then bound it tightly with clean linen. He covered her with a thick bearskin and moved to the other side of the cabin. He sat in his chair by the fire, picked up his rifle, and began to clean it. He did not look at her again. Clara awoke to the smell of wood smoke and broth. It was daylight. For a terrifying second, she did not know where she was. Then it returned. The brawl, the cold, the ravine, the man. She sat up too quickly. Her head spun, and a wave of nausea washed over her. The pain in her shoulder was a dull, heavy fire. She was wearing a man's long linen shirt, far too large for her. She pulled the bearskin up to her chin, her eyes darting around the small cabin. It was clean, sparse, a table, 2 chairs, a hearth, and the cot she was on. A few shelves held tins of food, books, and ammunition. There was no sign of the man. The door was closed. She was alone. Then the door opened, and he entered, his arms full of firewood. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat, his hat pulled low. He did not seem surprised to see her awake. He dropped the wood into the box by the hearth, the sound making her jump. He moved to the fire, ladling broth from a pot into a tin mug. He set it on the small table near her cot, along with a piece of hardtack. He did not come closer. "Eat," he said. She stared at him, her throat tight with fear. He was tall, broader than she had realized. His face was hard, weathered by sun and wind, and shadowed by a dark beard. His eyes were a pale, cold gray. They looked at her, but they seemed to be looking through her, at something else. "Where am I?" she whispered. Her voice was a dry croak. "My homestead." He did not turn from the fire. "You are safe from the weather, and from Silverknife." What do you want?" The question was automatic, the currency she had been taught. He finally turned to look at her. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes darkened. "I want nothing. You eat, you heal. When the snow clears and you're strong enough, you leave." He set a boundary with his words that was as real as a stone wall. He was not her savior. He was a man who had pulled her from a ditch. The rest was up to her. "You're safe here," he added, his voice quieter. "For now." The week that followed was a strange, silent truce. Clara's body began to heal. The fever broke, leaving her weak but clear-headed. The wound in her shoulder ached, but the sickness was gone. She ate the food he provided, broth, then jerky, then stew. He was a good hunter and a silent cook. She mistrusts his kindness. It was a language she did not understand. Kindness, in her world, was just the preamble to a demand. She waited for him to come to her cot in the night. She waited for the polite words to turn to threats. She waited for him to ask her to earn her keep. But he never did. He slept on a bedroll on the floor by the hearth, his back to her, his gun always within reach. He rose before the sun, tended his 2 horses, and spent his days outside, disappearing for hours. When he was inside, he read his books or sat by the fire, lost in a silence so deep it felt like a presence in the room. He barely spoke, and when he did, it was functional. "More wood! The water bucket is low!" His silence gave her space to remember. The memories came at night, sharp and cruel. She remembered her uncle's farm back in Ohio, the smell of hay and apples. Then she remembered his watery, apologetic eyes as he sold her. He had debts. He told her she was going to be a companion for a wealthy miner. She was 16. The wealthy miner was a brothel madam in a canvas and wood camp that smelled of despair. She remembered the first man, and the second, and the 10th. She remembered learning to make her mind go quiet, to separate herself from the body they were using. Levi had his own ghosts. The flames in the hearth were his torment. He watched them lick the pine logs and saw a different fire. He saw his small homestead in Kansas, built with his own hands for his wife, Sarah. He saw her laughing, her hands in flour, his 3-year-old son, Tom, pulling at her apron. Then he saw the fire, a drunken patrol of soldiers from the nearby fort, careless with their whiskey and their torches, had set the prairie ablaze. He had been miles away, mending a fence line. When he returned, it was too late. The world was gone, reduced to smoke and cinders. He had found what was left of Sarah and Tom huddled by the stone well. He remembered the smell of burnt cloth and roasted meat, a smell that haunted his sleep and soured his food. He had walked away from that life. From the army, he had once served as a scout, and had not stopped walking until he reached these mountains, a place he believed was remote enough to be safe from the carelessness of other men. He had vowed he was cursed, that anything he tried to build, anything he dared to love, would be turned to ash. Clara's strength returned slowly. One afternoon, she felt strong enough to stand by the cabin door. The cold air was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the thick, perfumed air of the gilded cage. Levi was in the small clearing, chopping wood. He had shed his coat and his flannel shirt. working in just his trousers and suspenders despite the cold. The muscles in his back and shoulders coiled and released with each swing of the axe. The thunk of the blade sinking into the wood was the only sound in the valley. He was covered in scars. Old, pale lines crisscrossed his back, souvenirs from his time in the war, from arrows or knives. She watched him, her hand gripping the door frame. He was powerful, a raw and simple display of male strength. A strange, unfamiliar warmth stirred deep in her belly. It was a feeling so long buried she barely recognized it. It felt like attraction. Shame followed, immediate and choking. Her body was a foul, used thing. How could she feel this? How could she look at a man and feel anything but terror or disgust? She was ruined. She was what they called her, a whore, a soiled dove. She backed away from the door, her face hot, and retreated to the cot, pulling the bearskin up to her chin. Levi saw her watching. He did not pause his swing. He had felt her eyes on him. He knew that look, but in her, it was different. It was tangled with a fear that was so deep it was almost part of her. He kept chopping, the rhythm steady, his mind on the past. He had not touched a woman since Sarah. He had not wanted to. The living were too complicated. They demanded things he could no longer give. That night, the wind began to howl. It was no longer a whistle, but a scream. Levi had been watching the sky for days, a heavy, bruised gray piling up in the north. "A storm is coming," he said, barring the door. "A bad one." By morning, the world was gone. A wall of white pressed against the single window. The snow did not fall. It moved horizontally, driven by a gale that shook the sturdy cabin. The sound was a constant, deafening roar. Levi checked the door, which was already blocked by a drift. He looked at his woodpile, then at Clara. "We are not going anywhere for a while," he said. The cabin, which had felt sparse, now felt small. The storm sealed them in. Two broken people trapped in a wooden box, with nothing but the fire, the wind, and the ghosts between them. The blizzard erased the world. For the first day, the sound was a physical weight, a constant, high-pitched scream that vibrated in Clara's teeth and rattled the tin cups on the shelf. The single window was a wall of churning white. The meager light inside the cabin turned gray and weak, making the corners fill with shadows. Levi seemed unmoved by it. He fed the fire, checked the bar on the door, and sat at his table, meticulously oiling his rifle. Clara stayed on the cot, wrapped in the bearskin, feeling useless. The cabin, which had seemed a refuge, now felt like a cage. She was trapped again, this time by the weather, with a man whose silence was as vast and cold as the storm outside. She had to do something, or the fear would eat her whole. She swung her legs off the cot. The floor was cold. She stood, testing her balance. Her shoulder ached, but the weakness was fading. She walked, unsteady, to the hearth. Levi's head lifted. He did not speak, but his eyes followed her. I can stir," she offered, her voice small. He stared at her for a long second, then gave a single, curt nod. He pushed the heavy iron pot of stew closer to the edge of the fire and handed her the long wooden spoon. She stirred. It was simple work, but it anchored her. It was a task that did not involve her body, only her hands. They fell into a strange, shared silence. The only sounds were the roar of the wind, the crackle of the fire, and the scrape of the spoon against the pot. By the second day, the wind had quieted to a low, mournful howl, but the snow was still falling, thick and heavy. The cabin was noticeably darker. Drifts had piled high against the door and halfway up the window. Levi had to clear the chimney flue from the inside with a long pole to keep them from choking on smoke. Clara began to help in earnest. She swept the floor. She tidied the shelves. She learned the small routines of his home. Her movements were hesitant, always watching him, expecting a sharp word or a blow for doing something wrong. But the blow never came. If she put something in the wrong place, he simply moved it back without comment. The tension was a living thing in the small room. It was not the violent, sour tension of the gilded cage. It was a different pressure, a shared awareness. She was acutely aware of him, of the way he moved, of the space his body took up. He was just as aware of her. On the third night, she woke up screaming. She was back in Silverknife Gulch. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer. Silas, the madam's enforcer, had her pinned in the storeroom. His breath was hot on her face, his hand clamped over her mouth. She was fighting, kicking, but he was too heavy, his weight crushing the air from her lungs. She could hear the piano playing downstairs, a cheerful, terrible tune. "Clara," she thrashed, pulling at the hand that was not there. "Clara, you are safe." A hand gripped her shoulder. Not her wounded one, but the other. She cried out, striking at it. "You are safe. Wake up." The voice was low, insistent. It cut through the fog of the nightmare. Her eyes flew open. She was in the cabin. The fire was banked to low embers, casting a faint red glow. Levi was kneeling by her cot, his hand on her shoulder. His face was a mask of shadows. She gasped, pulling air into her lungs, her body slick with a cold sweat. She was shaking, the terror of the dream so real she could still smell the whiskey on Silas's breath. Levi did not move. He just kept his hand on her shoulder. A heavy, grounding weight. He did not pull her close. He did not stroke her hair. He just knelt there, a solid presence in the dark. "It was a dream," he said. His voice was rough from sleep. She nodded, unable to speak, her throat raw. The shaking would not stop. He stood, moved to the hearth, and tossed a log onto the embers. Sparks flew up, and the flames caught, licking at the new wood. He motioned with his head. "Come to the fire." She obeyed, pulling the bearskin with her. She sat on the floor, as close to the heat as she could get, tucking her knees to her chest. He sat in his chair, a few feet away, watching the fire. For a long time, neither spoke. The cabin was quiet, the storm having paused. He was going to kill me," she whispered, the words tearing out of her. Levi's jaw tightened. "He did not. He will, if he finds me. They will." Levi looked at her, his gray eyes seeming to pierce the shadows. "They will not find you here." She stared into the flames, her body still trembling, but the terror was beginning to recede. In its place was a vast, aching confusion. She looked at the man across from her. He had saved her. He had tended her wound. He had fed her and kept her warm. And he had not asked for a single thing. He had not laid a hand on her, except to wake her from a nightmare. It made no sense. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He did not look at her. "Why what? Why have you been kind?" The word felt strange on her tongue. "You were dying. I could not leave you to the birds." "No," she insisted, the question burning in her. "That is not what I mean. You are a man. I am a woman. We are trapped here. Why have you not collected payment?" She forced the words out, the shame coiling in her gut. "I have nothing. I cannot pay you. But other men, they would have taken it. They would have used me." Levi was very still. He picked up a stick from the wood box and began to whittle at it with his knife, the blade moving in long, smooth strokes. He did not look at her. The cabin was filled with the sound of the blade shaving the wood. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, flat, and colder than the snow outside. "I am not them. I pulled you from a ditch. That does not buy me your body. Your body is not currency." Clara stared at him, tears welling in her eyes, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of confusion. "You are not something to be taken." "Clara," he said, his eyes still on the wood. "You are just a person." She had not been a person for a very long time. She had been property. She had been a thing to be used, a vessel for men's anger and loneliness. His words hit her, and the walls she had built around herself, the walls that had kept her sane in the gilded cage, began to fracture. I do not understand," she stammered, the tears now falling hot on her cold hands. "I do not know what this is. I do not know what kindness feels like. Not from a man. I thought it was always a trick, a prelude." She took a ragged breath. I do not know what real desire feels like. Or choice. I only know fear. I only know what they wanted. He stopped whittling. He looked at her, his face hard, but the coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something she could not name. It was not pity. Pity was soft and useless. This was something harder, something that felt like recognition. Then you will learn, he said. He tossed the stick into the fire and stood up. Get some sleep. The storm is not done. The storm lasted for 4 more days. It was a week in total, 7 days of being sealed in. But something had changed after that night. The tension had not vanished, but it had shifted. The fear that had kept Clara rigid and silent began to recede, replaced by a hesitant curiosity. Levi began to teach her things. It started with the coffee. He had a small, hand-cranked grinder. He showed her how to measure the beans, how to clamp the grinder between her knees, and how to turn the handle until the beans were a fine, dark powder. It was a small, simple ritual, but it was theirs. His large, calloused hand would brush hers as he showed her, and she learned not to flinch. The next day, when the snow had stopped and a weak sun shone, he took her to the small, sturdy barn built into the hillside. The cold was biting. The snow piled higher than her head. Inside, the barn was warm, smelling of horses and hay. He taught her how to saddle his horse. Roan. You never pull the cinch tight all at once, he instructed, his voice patient. You give him a moment. Let him breathe. Then you pull again. It is about respect. He works for you. You do not abuse him for it. He was teaching her about the horse, but she heard a different lesson. She learned to brush the horse, to clean his hooves, to speak to him in a low, calm voice. These were good, clean tasks. They made her feel strong. They made her feel useful. As the trust built, the stories began to spill out. She told him first, in fragments, while they sat by the fire one evening. My uncle, he raised me. His wife died of consumption. She paused, staring at her hands. He had debts. A man from the East. My uncle. He cried when he put me on the wagon. He said I was going to be a lady's companion. Levi just nodded, loading his pipe with tobacco. He did not offer condolences. He did not tell her it was terrible. He just listened. His silence was an invitation. I was 16 years old, she whispered. The madam. She met me at the stagecoach. She laughed. She said companions work on their backs. Levi lit his pipe, the flare of the match illuminating the deep lines around his eyes. He puffed, the sweet smell of the tobacco smoke filling the cabin. She locked me in a room for 3 days, until I agreed. You did what you had to do to survive, he said, his voice quiet. I survived, she agreed. But I am not clean. Levi smoked his pipe. Nothing out here is clean. Clara, not the water, not the towns, and not the men. He waited a day, but he repaid her story with his own. The storm was ending, the wind just a sigh. I fought in the war, he said, looking at the rifle above the mantel. I was a scout. I was good at it. Too good. He did not specify which war. He did not have to. She had seen the posters, heard the talk of the savages. You kill a man, face to face, it changes you. You kill a dozen, it ruins you. But he shook his head, his gaze dark. We were not fighting soldiers. We were fighting ghosts, and we were burning villages to the ground. Women, children. He looked at his hands. I walked away, left my commission, left everything. I was done killing innocents. He fell silent for a long time, the only sound the dripping of melting snow from the eaves. I came to Kansas, built a homestead. I met Sarah. She was kind. She did not care about the war. We had a son, Tom. Clara watched him, her heart aching. I thought I was safe, thought I had outrun the past. He pointed to the fire. A fire started, a patrol of soldiers, drunk, riding from the fort. They were careless. It was a dry season. The prairie went up like tinder. His voice was hollow. Dead. I was miles away, mending a fence. By the time I smelled the smoke, It was too late. The sky was black. I ran all the way home. He stopped. Clara could barely breathe. They were by the well. They had tried to reach the water, but the fire was too fast. He closed his eyes. I have lived here ever since. I live here because I am cursed. Everything I touch, everything I try to build, I burn to the ground. It is better to be alone. They were two broken things, trapped in the thawing snow, each seeing their own ruin reflected in the other's eyes. The snow held them prisoner for almost a week. On the 7th night, the air was clear and sharp. The moon was so bright on the snow it looked like daylight outside. The cabin was warmer than it had been. The fire kept high. Levi was sitting at the table, his shirt off. The cold had settled deep into his bones, into his old wounds. A long, puckered scar on his left shoulder blade, one she had not seen before, was knotted and angry. It is an old bullet wound, he said, wincing as he tried to rub it. It always seizes up when the damp gets in. I have salve, Clara said, remembering the herbs he had used on her. She retrieved the small tin. I can, if you will let me. He hesitated. This was different from grinding coffee. This was touch. He finally nodded, turning his back to her. She approached him slowly. She dipped her fingers into the sharp-smelling salve and put her hands on his skin. He was hot, his muscles tight as corded wood. He hissed as her cold fingers touched the inflamed scar. Sorry, she whispered. It is fine. Just press hard. She did. She worked her thumbs into the knot, kneading the muscle as she had seen him do to Roan. The proximity was overwhelming. She was close enough to smell the faint scent of wood smoke and sweat on his skin. She could feel the heat radiating from his back. He was so strong, yet he was letting her see him in pain. He was breathing deeply, his head bowed. Under her hands, the muscle began to soften. That is better, he murmured. She did not stop. Her hands moved over his shoulders, learning the map of his scars. A warmth that had nothing to do with the fire began to spread through her, low in her belly. It was the feeling she had felt watching him chop wood, but stronger now, undiluted by shame. It was raw, simple, and terrifying. He turned his head, looking at her over his shoulder. His eyes were dark, his lips parted. The air in the cabin became thick, electric. He did not move, but his gaze held her. Clara's breath hitched. She did not think. She did not weigh the consequences. She only felt. She leaned in, her heart pounding against her ribs, and pressed her mouth to his. It was clumsy, a collision of lips, but it was a kiss. Levi froze. For one long, agonizing second, he was completely still. He remembered Sarah. He remembered his vow, his curse. He should push her away. He was ruin. Then her hand slid from his shoulder to his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, and something inside him broke. His loneliness, a force as vast and cold as the blizzard, overwhelmed his resolve. He turned, his chair scraping the floor, and grabbed her. His mouth came down on hers, not gently, but with a desperate, starving hunger. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a kiss of need. He pulled her against his bare chest, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her from her feet. She gasped into his mouth, shocked by his sudden force, but she did not pull away. She clung to him, meeting his hunger with her own desperate, confused yearning. He broke the kiss, his breathing ragged. He looked at her, his eyes wild. He lifted her in his arms, as easily as he had lifted her from the ravine. He took the 3 steps to his cot and laid her down. The moment her back hit the mattress, it happened. The man's body looming over her, the smell of whiskey, the weight, the pain. Her mind shattered. She was not in the cabin. She was in the gilded cage. She was trapped. Clara flinched. It was not a small movement. It was a violent, convulsive shudder. Her eyes, which had been dark with desire, went wide with animal terror. Her hands flew up to cover her face. "No!" she cried. A choked, terrified sound. Levi stopped, instantly. He had been leaning over her, his body poised to follow, but her cry, and the sheer, primal fear on her face, was like a bucket of ice water. He stumbled back as if he had been struck. He looked at her, and he did not see the woman he had just kissed. He saw the broken, terrified girl from the ravine. He saw what he had almost done. He had seen that fear before, in the eyes of the women in the villages he had burned. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. She curled into a tight ball on the cot, pulling the bearskin around her, her body shaking with violent sobs. "I am sorry." She wept into the fur. "I am sorry. I am sorry. I am not right. I am ruined." She was terrified. She had invited him, then rejected him. In her world, this was a punishable offense. This was when the kindness stopped and the real violence began. "Please," she begged, her voice muffled, desperate to fix what she had broken. "I am begging you, hurry, please. Just get it over with. Do not be angry, please." Levi stood by the cot, his own body trembling with a mix of adrenaline and self-loathing. He listened to her words. Hurry, get it over with. She was not asking for intimacy. She was bracing for an assault. She was trying to trade her body for her safety. The last of his own anger, his own frustrated need, evaporated, leaving only a vast, aching sadness. He sat on the edge of the cot, but he did not touch her. He waited. He waited until her terrified sobs quieted into ragged, shuddering breaths. "I am not going to hurry," he said, his voice thick. "I am not going to do anything. There is nothing to get over with." She slowly lowered her hands, peeking at him through her tear-matted hair. He was not angry. He was just sitting there, his hands on his knees, his shoulders slumped. He looked defeated. "You kissed me," he stated. It was not an accusation, just a fact. "I know," she whispered. I wanted to. I thought I did. But when I laid you down," he finished for her. He nodded, understanding completely. "You remembered." She nodded, fresh tears leaking from her eyes. He looked at her, curled up and small, and his heart, which he had thought dead and buried with his family, cracked open. He reached out, his hand moving slowly, giving her time to pull away. He did not touch her skin. He gently took the edge of the bearskin and pulled it up over her shoulder. "We will go slow," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, softer than she thought possible. "Or not at all. Clara, it does not matter, but I will not be one of them." She stared at him, her chest aching. He lay down on the cot, on top of the blankets, beside her, but not touching her. He just lay there, a solid, warm presence in the cold room. After a long minute, he carefully, hesitantly, laid his arm over her, holding her. It was not the embrace of a lover. It was the embrace of a man holding onto an anchor, holding her to keep her from floating away. Clara was rigid at first, her body expecting a trick, but he just held her. He did not move. He just breathed. Slowly, bit by bit. The tension drained out of her. She was safe. He had stopped. He had held her, and he was not angry. For the first time since she was 16 years old, Clara fell asleep in the arms of a man, and she was not afraid. The thaw came not as a flood, but as a sound. It was the sound of dripping water, a constant, gentle percussion on the cabin roof. After the roaring silence of the blizzard, the drip, drip, drip was the loudest sound Clara had ever heard. It was the sound of the world cracking open. Levi unbarred the door on the 8th day. A wave of cool, damp air rolled into the cabin, smelling of wet pine, rich mud, and something alive. The snow had not vanished, but it had sunk, pulling back from the cabin walls. The world was a blinding, pristine white, but the grip of the ice was broken. Clara stood in the doorway, her hand on the frame, breathing it in. The air was so sharp it stung her lungs. A clean, welcome pain. "We need to check the snares," Levi said. He was already pulling on his coat, his face set in its usual impassive lines, but she thought she saw a restlessness in his eyes. He, too, had been caged. He saddled both horses. He led Roan, the quieter of the two, to the door. "You will ride him." It was not a question. Clara looked at the animal, then at Levi. She had ridden before, but never well, and never on a saddle like this. "I do not know how," she said, her voice small. "Then you will learn. I will not have you trapped here if you need to run." The words sent a small chill through her, but she understood. He was not teaching her to ride. He was teaching her to escape. He helped her up, his hands on her waist. She tensed, but the touch was impersonal, strong and brief. He put the reins in her hands, his calloused fingers brushing hers as he showed her how to hold them. "He follows your lead. Do not fight him. Guide him. He knows the land better than you do." They rode out. The world that had been a white prison was now a vast, open cathedral of mountains and sky. The snow was deep in the hollows, but the southern slopes were already showing patches of brown earth. Clara was clumsy, her body stiff with fear. She held the reins in a death grip. Levi rode ahead, never looking back, but always matching his mare's pace to hers. He navigated the land with an easy, instinctive grace. He was part of it. She was just a trespasser. "That ridge," he called out, pointing, "leads to the high pasture. Good grass in summer." He pointed to a break in the trees. "That creek will take you south, to the flatlands, if you follow it for 2 days." He was giving her a map, drawn in the air. She tried to memorize it. She tried to memorize the shape of the peaks, the way the sun cut across the valley. They found the snares, 2 of them holding rabbits. Levi handled the animals with a quick, brutal efficiency that made her look away. But it was a death with purpose. It was for food. It was clean. The next day, he taught her to shoot. He pulled his heavy Winchester from the cabin. He set a tin can on a fence post 50 yards away. "You need to know this," he said, his voice flat. He handed her the rifle. The weight of it shocked her. A heavy, solid thing of wood and cold steel. It smelled of oil and power. She held it awkwardly, her hands trembling. "It will kick," he said. "Hold it tight to your shoulder. Make it part of you. If you hold it loose, it will break your bone." He stood behind her, adjusting her stance. He put his hand on her shoulder, pressing the rifle butt firmly into the hollow. "There." His other hand moved to her waist. "Stand solid." His closeness was unnerving, distracting. He was warm behind her, a wall of wool and muscle. She could smell the faint scent of smoke and pine on him. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice low by her ear. "Breathe out. When you are empty, you squeeze the trigger. Do not pull it. Squeeze." She tried. She squinted down the long barrel, the tiny metal sight wavering. She held her breath, then let it out, and squeezed. The explosion was deafening. The kick was a solid, violent punch that slammed into her, rattling her teeth. She cried out, stumbling backward. Levi caught her. The tin can sat on the post, untouched. "Again," he said, his voice expressionless. She was shaking, her shoulder throbbing. "I cannot." "Yes, you can." He turned her back around, resetting her stance. "You were afraid of it. Do not be afraid. You command it. It does not command you." She loaded the next cartridge, her fingers fumbling. She did it again. She breathed. She held the rifle so tight her knuckles were white. She breathed out. She squeezed. Clang. The can leaped from the post, spinning into the snow. A strange, unfamiliar feeling bubbled in her chest. She stared at the empty post, her mouth open. "I did it," she whispered. She turned to look at him, a wide, shaky smile spreading across her face. It was the first time he had ever seen her smile. Her whole face changed, the fear and sadness receding, revealing a woman he had not seen before. A slow smile cracked his own weathered face. It was a small, rusty movement, as if the muscles had forgotten how. "You did it." He agreed. A sound tore from Clara's throat. It was short and sharp. A rusty bark. It was a laugh. She had not laughed in years. The sound of it surprised her so much she laughed again, a little stronger this time. Levi watched her, and a low chuckle rumbled in his chest. It was the first time they had not been 2 survivors, or a man and a refugee. They were just a man and a woman, standing in the sun, laughing. The laughter faded, leaving a warm, comfortable silence between them. A few days later, they were down by the river. The ice had broken up, and the water ran high and fast, a muddy, churning roar. Levi was teaching her how to fish with a line, his quiet voice explaining how to read the water, where the fish would rest from the current. He was focused on the line, his back to her. When he heard the sound, he turned. Clara was sitting on a flat rock, her knees drawn to her chest. She was staring at the rushing water, her shoulders shaking. She was crying, a deep, silent, hopeless weeping that tore at him more than her nightmare screams had. He reeled in his line and walked over to her. He did not sit, just stood beside her, watching the water. "What is it?" he asked. "The water," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "It is so clean. It washes everything away. It makes the rock smooth." She choked on a sob. "I will never be clean. Levi." He waited. He knew this was a dam breaking, and he just had to stand clear until the flood passed. She was touching her back, her hand moving under the thick wool shirt he had given her. "When I was there, at the gilded cage, sometimes I fought, sometimes I said no. I tried. The first few times. Silas, the man who works for her, he would beat me." She took a ragged breath. "But the Madam Eve, she said a beating only bruises the merchandise. She said you had to mark it, so it would remember." Her voice dropped to a near inaudible whisper. "She had a mule whip, the kind with a braided tip. She made Silas hold me down on the floor, in her office." Levi's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He kept his eyes on the river. She carved my back. She said she was signing her name, so I would never forget who I belonged to." The sobs racked her body. "I am ruined. Levi, I am marked. I am scarred. No man, no good man, could ever want someone so foul. I am ruined." Levi was silent for a full minute. The only sound was the roar of the river and Clara's weeping. He understood. He understood the shame of marks you could not wash away. She finally looked up at him, her eyes desperate, expecting him to turn away in disgust, to confirm her worst fear. He did not. He just looked at her, his pale eyes unreadable. He turned his back to her. "Clara." She watched, confused, as he slowly unbuttoned his wool shirt. He shrugged it off his shoulders, letting it fall into the mud. He was wearing his linen undershirt. He pulled that up, over his head, and tossed it aside. He stood bare-chested in the cold spring air. His back was a landscape of old violence. She had seen it before, when he chopped wood, but not this close, not like this. The scars were pale and white against his sun-darkened skin, long, thin lines from knives, puckered, round hollows from bullets. A wide, glossy patch of smooth, unnatural skin on his left shoulder blade. "This," he said, his voice low, touching a long, faded mark that ran from his ribs to his hip. "This was an Apache lance, Arizona Territory, 1871. I was conscious when he pulled it out." He turned around, facing her. His chest and stomach were no better. A ragged, star-shaped scar sat just above his collarbone. "This," he said, touching it, "is a Union bullet, from my own patrol, fired by a drunk fool at night, the Battle of the Wilderness, 1864. I spent 3 days in a mud hole, waiting to die." He gestured to the map of healed wounds that covered his torso. "These are from knives. This is from a fire. I'm a map of everything that ever tried to kill me. Clara, I am a history of ruin." He looked her dead in the eye, his gaze stripping away her shame. "Then we are both ruined," he said. He was not offering her pity. He was offering her truth. He was not disgusted. He was the same. She stared at him, at the terrible history written on his skin. Her tears had stopped. Her hand, trembling, rose from her lap. She reached out, her fingers hovering just an inch from the ragged bullet wound on his chest. He did not move. He did not breathe. She finally, gently, touched it. Her fingertips traced the puckered skin. It was real. He was real. That night, the cabin felt different. The air was charged, thick with unspoken things, the wall of scars. His and hers was no longer between them. It connected them. They ate their meal of rabbit stew in their usual silence, but it was not an empty silence. It was a heavy, waiting silence. He banked the fire and went to his bedroll on the floor. Clara went to the cot. She lay in the dark, her heart pounding a heavy, slow rhythm against her ribs. She was not afraid. For the first time, she was not afraid. She was terrified, but it was a different kind of terror. It was the fear of the unknown, not the fear of the known. She heard him shift on the floor. He was not asleep. She sat up. "Levi." His voice came from the shadows. "I am here." She swung her legs off the cot. The floor was cold. She stood, wrapped in the thin linen shirt she slept in, and walked the few steps to his bedroll. She could see the faint outline of him, his eyes reflecting the red glow of the embers. He tensed, sitting up on one elbow. "Clara, are you all right?" She did not answer. She knelt beside him on the hard-planked floor. She was looking at him, seeing him, not as a savior, not as a threat, but as a man who was as broken as she was. She had a choice. It was a feeling so new, so powerful, it made her dizzy. He had given her this. He had given her back her own body, by refusing to take it. "You are not ruined," she whispered. His voice was hoarse. "Neither are you." She leaned in, slowly, giving him every chance to turn away. She pressed her mouth to his. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss from the blizzard. It was not the clumsy collision of her first attempt. This was slow, hesitant, and deliberate. It was a question. He did not grab her. He did not move. Then, slowly, his hand came up and cupped her face. His thumb, rough as bark, gently brushed her cheek. He kissed her back. She trembled. He trembled. She pulled back the bearskin that covered him. He did not stop her. She slipped into the bedroll, lying beside him on the hard floor. It was cold, but where their bodies touched, she was burning. He turned to her, his face inches from hers in the dark. He smelled of wood smoke. They were clumsy. Their clothes were in the way. This was not the practiced, false intimacy of the gilded cage. This was fumbling and real. He helped her with the buttons of the shirt, his fingers brushing her skin. When the shirt fell open, he did not look at her with hunger. He looked at her with a kind of reverence. He saw the bullet wound he had tended, now a puckered pink scar on her shoulder. He leaned down and pressed his lips to it. A single, hot tear slid from the corner of Clara's eye and disappeared into her hair. It was not a tear of pain. It was a tear of release. He touched her. His hands were slow, hesitant, as if he were learning a new and fragile language. He touched her face, her neck, her arms. He was discovering her, and she let him. She was not a body, enduring. She was a woman, participating. When he finally moved over her, he braced his weight on his arms, his body trembling with the effort. He stopped, his face shadowed, his eyes searching hers. He was giving her the choice, up to the very last second. She looked up at him. In the faint firelight, she saw the map of his scars. She reached up with one hand, not to push him away, but to touch the old bullet wound on his chest. "Levi," she whispered. It was not a plea. It was an acceptance. It was raw. It was hesitant. It was a desperate, emotional collision. It was not gentle, but it was not violent. It was two people, starved of touch, of connection, finally finding it. Their bodies were clumsy, but their needs were perfectly aligned. Tears mixed with sweat. They clung to each other. Two broken souls holding on in the dark, trembling from a pain that was not new, and a need that had been denied for a very long time. Clara woke first. The cabin was gray with the first light of dawn. The fire was low. She was on the bedroll, tangled in the bearskin, tangled with Levi. He was asleep, his breathing deep and even. His arm was thrown across her waist, holding her even in sleep. His face, in repose, was different. The harsh lines were softened, the constant tension gone. He looked younger and unguarded. She watched him, her chest filled with a strange, quiet peace. The shame was gone. The terror was gone. She felt still. Carefully, she slipped from his grasp. She pulled on her shirt and trousers. She rebuilt the fire, the small, familiar task grounding her. She began to grind the coffee, the rhythmic crunching sound filling the quiet. He woke to the smell. He sat up, pushing his hair back from his face. He watched her as she worked by the fire, her back to him. She felt him watching her. She poured him a cup of coffee and brought it to him. Their fingers brushed as he took the tin mug. His eyes held hers. He did not smile, but his gaze was warm. She turned back to the hearth to start breakfast, mixing cornmeal for skillet bread. She heard him stand. He came up behind her. She tensed, an old, deep reflex, her body bracing. He just stood there for a moment. Then, his hand settled on her waist, resting on the fabric of her shirt. It was not a sexual touch. It was not a demand. It was a simple, solid presence. It was tender. It was normal. It was the most shocking thing that had ever happened to her. She did not pull away. She leaned back against his hand, just a fraction, and kept stirring the cornmeal. The peace lasted until mid-morning. The sun was high, and the day was warm. Levi was outside, splitting wood, and Clara was airing out the blankets, hanging them on the fence rail. A sound cut through the air. A horse, not his, not hers. Levi's axe stopped mid-swing. He was instantly, terribly still. He looked at Clara. "Go inside. Now. Stay away from the window." She did not question him. She ran inside, her heart leaping into her throat. She watched through a small crack in the wallboards. A man rode into the clearing. He was not a cowboy. He wore a dark duster despite the warmth, and 2 pistols with bone handles were strapped low on his hips. He had a greasy, thin face and a smile that did not touch his cold, dark eyes. "Hello, the house," he called, his voice oily and loud. He stopped his horse 20 yards from Levi. Levi stood by the woodpile, the axe in his hand, loose and easy. "That is far enough." The man's smile widened. "Friendly sort, ain't you? Name's Harlan. Just looking for a little information, and maybe some water for my horse." "Ain't got information," Levi said, his voice flat. "And the river's that way." He pointed with the axe. Harlan's eyes moved past Levi, scanning the cabin. He saw the blankets on the rail. He saw Roan, a horse he clearly recognized. In the small corral. His eyes narrowed. "I'm looking for a girl," Harlan said, his voice casual. "A runaway. Property of Madame Eve, over at the Gilded Cage in Silver Knife Gulch. Answers to the name of Clara." Inside, Clara put her hand over her mouth to stop her cry. Her blood turned to ice. Harlan's eyes fixed on Levi. "A skinny thing, pretty, though I hear she got marked up before she flew the coop. You seen anyone like that?" Levi's face was stone. "No." "Shame," Harlan said, tilting his hat back. "There is a debt on her head, $10 for her return, and maybe a bonus for whoever has been harboring her. Madame Eve takes her property serious." "You are on private land," Levi said. His voice was low, colder than the river. "Just askin'," Harlan said, holding up his hands. "But I will tell you this, the madam has a long memory, and I am a patient man." "Ride out," Levi said. It was not a suggestion. "I think," Harlan said, "that I will just have a look in that cabin." He made to move his horse. Levi did not raise his voice. "You take one more step. I will put this axe through your skull." The cold, simple menace in his voice stopped the bounty hunter better than a gunshot would have. The smile on Harlan's face vanished. He looked at Levi, truly looked at him, at the width of his shoulders, the coldness in his eyes, the absolute lack of fear. Harlan was a bully, not a fighter. He pulled his horse back. "No need for that, mister. I will be back, and I will not be alone." He spat on the ground. "You tell that whore, when you see her, that Harlan is coming, and he is bringing Silas." He wheeled his horse around and galloped out of the clearing. Levi watched him go. He stood there for a full minute after the sound of the hooves had faded. Then he walked inside, dropping the heavy bar across the door. Clara was backed against the far wall, shaking so hard she could barely stand. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew my name. He knew about the marks." The peace of the morning was gone, shattered. The cabin was a trap again. "He is gone," Levi said. He walked to the shelf and began checking the ammunition in his rifle. "He will be back," she cried, the words tearing out of her. "He said he would bring Silas. You do not understand. Silas is a monster. They will kill you. They will burn this place. They will kill you for me." Levi slid a cartridge into the chamber. "I am not letting them take you." "No!" She ran to him, grabbing his arm. "You cannot. I am not worth this. I am not worth your home, your life." He looked at her, his face hard. "It is not for you to decide." She stared at him, at the set of his jaw, at the rifle in his hands. She saw his home, the first place she had ever felt safe. She saw him, the first man who had ever treated her like a person. And she saw the fire he had described, the one that took his wife and child. She was the curse. She was the fire. She had brought the drunk, careless soldiers to his door. That night, she was quiet. She was a hollow, cold thing. She helped him barricade the window. She watched him clean his pistol. She knew what she had to do. She waited. She lay on her cot, pretending to sleep. For hours, she listened to his breathing, waiting for it to deepen, to settle into the rhythm of sleep. The moon was high, filling the cabin with a pale, ghostly light. She had to leave. She had to lead them away from him. It was the only way. She rose from the cot, a silent shadow. She did not take his coat. She did not take food. She would only slow herself down. She took only the blanket from her cot. She moved across the floor without a sound. She reached the door. Her hands, trembling, went to the heavy wooden bar. She put her hands underneath it and began to lift, slowly, trying not to make a sound. The heavy wooden bar was agonizingly slow. Clara lifted it an inch at a time, her muscles screaming in protest. Her breath held so tight her chest ached. The wood scraped against the bracket, a sound as loud as a gunshot in the silent cabin. She froze, across the room. Levi's breathing did not change. He was asleep, turned away from her, a dark shape under the bearskin. She let out her breath in a silent, shaky sigh. Guilt, sharp and acidic, rose in her throat. She was betraying the only kindness she had ever known, but it was a kindness she was about to destroy. Harlan's oily voice echoed in her mind. "I will be back, and I will not be alone." She was the fire. She was the curse. She would not be the one to burn him down. She lifted the bar again, faster this time. Ignoring the sound, she eased it from the brackets and set it gently on the floor. The cold night air hit her immediately as she pulled the heavy door open just wide enough to slip through. She did not take his coat. She did not take his boots. She took only the thin blanket from her own cot. She was barefoot, but the ground, though cold, was no longer frozen solid. The mud of the thaw squelched between her toes. She did not look back. She ran. She ran from the small, safe pool of light from the cabin and into the vast, silver darkness of the plains. The moon was high, a cold, indifferent eye, illuminating a world of shadows and rock. She headed south, toward the flatlands he had pointed out. She had no plan. She would just go, lead them away. If they found her, but they would not find him. The ground was brutal. Sharp rocks, hidden in the mud, sliced her feet. Thorny brush tore at the thin linen of her shirt. She wrapped the blanket tighter, but the wind cut through it. She ran until her lungs were fire and her legs were numb. Then she walked. She walked until a wave of despair, so total and consuming, finally broke her. She collapsed at the edge of a shallow arroyo, miles from the cabin. She huddled into a ball, pulling the blanket over her head. And for the first time, she wept for him. She wept for the life she was ruining, for the peace she had shattered. She was a poison, a plague. and she had infected the one good, clean place left in the world. She sobbed into the cold mud, her body shaking with a grief so profound it felt like dying. Levi woke to the cold. It was not the cold from the fire dying. It was the sharp, invasive cold of the open night. His eyes snapped open. The door was ajar, a black rectangle of night against the cabin's dim interior. The bar was on the floor. "Clara?" The silence was absolute. A raw, familiar panic seized him, identical to the one he had felt when he first smelled the smoke in Kansas. He was on his feet in a second, his heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm. He saw her cot. It was empty. "No!" he snarled, a low, animal sound. He did not bother with his coat. He grabbed his pistol, shoved his feet into his boots, and ran outside. The moon made the tracking easy. Her small, bare footprints were pressed clear and sharp in the damp earth. They pointed south. "Fool!" he whispered, his voice shaking with a cold rage. "You damn fool!" He did not waste time on the mare. He saddled Roan, his movements precise and violent. He swung into the saddle and dug his heels into the horse's flanks. Roan leaped forward, eating up the ground, following the clear, desperate trail of a woman running from the only home she had. He found her in less than an hour. She was a dark, huddled shape by the arroyo, barely visible. He reined Roan in hard, the horse snorting and dancing. Levi swung down from the saddle before the horse even stopped. She heard him, her head snapped up, her face pale and streaked with mud and tears in the moonlight. She looked hunted, broken. She scrambled to her feet, holding the blanket around her. "Go away!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Leave me! They are coming for me! Not you! I will not bring this to you! I am ruin! Levi, I am poison!" He strode toward her, his face a mask of cold fury. "You think you are ruin?" He grabbed her, his hands clamping down on her upper arms. He shook her, not in violence, but in a desperate, raw need to make her see. "You think you are ruin? I am ruin. I am the one who burns things." She stared at him, terrified by this new, raw energy. He had never been this way. "You run from this," he growled, his voice thick. "You run from me." "I am saving you," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "They will kill you." "I am already dead," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh, painful whisper. He was not looking at her, but through her, at the fire that never stopped burning in his memory. "I told you about the fire," he breathed, his grip tightening. "I did not tell you the truth." She went still, her eyes locked on his. "I was not miles away. I was closer. I was on the ridge. I saw the smoke. I saw the flames when they were small, just catching the edge of the barn. I saw the soldiers, laughing, riding away. I heard—" His voice broke. "I heard Sarah scream my name. I heard her screaming for me." Clara's hand came up to her mouth. "Levi, no." "I had my rifle," he continued, his eyes squeezed shut, the confession tearing out of him. "There were 4 of them. I was one man. I was a scout. I could have done something. Fired a shot, distracted them. But I froze." He opened his eyes, and they were hollow, haunted. "I froze. I lay in the dirt on that ridge, and I watched. I watched them ride off. I watched the flames climb the walls of my home. I listened to my wife and my son screaming, and I did nothing. I let them burn because I was a coward." He finally looked at her, his gaze so intense it pinned her. "That is ruin, Clara. That is fear. And that is what you are doing now. You are running. You are letting them win. You are letting them burn me down just the same. You running now? It would be the same." He let go of her, his hands falling to his sides, the energy gone, leaving him looking hollowed out. Clara stared at him, her own pain eclipsed by the vast, raw wound he had just exposed. He had not just lost his family, he had watched them die, paralyzed by a fear he could not forgive. And he saw her running as the same betrayal. She stepped toward him, her feet bleeding, her body shaking from the cold. She did not know what to say. She did not have the words, so she just put her cold, muddy hands on his chest. "I am not her," she whispered. "And this is not that," His eyes focused on her. He looked at her bare, bleeding feet. He looked at the thin blanket. Without a word, he bent, slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, and lifted her. He carried her home. He did not speak on the ride back. He held her tight against his chest, her head tucked under his chin, his own coat now wrapped around her. She was light, fragile, but she was no longer cold. His body was a furnace. He carried her into the cabin, kicked the door shut, and slid the heavy bar into place. It was a sound of finality, a sound of a choice being made. He set her down, not on her cot, but in his chair by the hearth. He stoked the fire, adding logs until it blazed, filling the room with heat and light. He knelt in front of her. He took the basin, filled it with warm water from the kettle, and gently, his touch firm, he lifted one of her feet and placed it in the water. She hissed as the warmth hit the open cuts. He said nothing. He took a cloth and began to wash the mud and blood from her skin. He was methodical, his touch impersonal, yet devastatingly intimate. He cleaned every cut. He dried her feet, and then, using the same salve he had used on his shoulder, he tended her wounds. He did not speak. His silence was not the empty, cold silence of before. It was a heavy, charged, and waiting silence. When he was finished, he stood. Clara looked up at him. The firelight played across his face, throwing shadows into the hollows of his cheeks. He was a hard man, a man who had seen the worst of the world and the worst of himself, and he was still here. He reached down and cupped her face, his thumbs brushing the last of the tear tracks from her cheeks. "You are not leaving," he said. It was not a question. It was a vow. "I am not leaving," she whispered. He pulled her to her feet. He did not kiss her. He simply looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the embers of the fire he carried. And they were not just embers of pain. They were embers of a desperate, long-buried life. He kissed her. It was not the hesitant, questioning kiss of before. It was not the hungry, desperate collision of the blizzard. This was a claiming. His mouth was hard on hers, fierce, demanding. He was not asking. He was taking what she was now freely, desperately, offering. She met his kiss with an equal fire. She was done running. She was done being afraid. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down, her fingers tangling in his hair. This was not about fear, or shame, or even comfort. This was about two souls, shattered and lost, finding an anchor in the storm. He lifted her, his arms locking around her, and carried her to his cot. He did not lay her down gently. He fell with her, onto the bearskin, their bodies colliding, a tangle of limbs and mouths. It was desperate. It was affirming. It was a promise made not in words, but in teeth and hands and a shared, ragged breath. He was rough, but it was not the carelessness of violence. It was the roughness of a starving man finally allowed to feast. He tore the thin shirt from her body, and she tore at his. They were frantic, needing to erase the space between them. When their skin met, it was a jolt. This time, there was no flinching. There was no memory of Silas, no shadow of the gilded cage. There was only Levi. There was only this cabin, this fire, this man. He was all muscle and scars, a terrain she was learning, and she welcomed the weight of him. It was not a crushing weight. It was an anchoring one. He was here. He was real. She clung to him, her nails digging into the scarred landscape of his back. And she finally let go. The next morning, the world was grimly bright. The air in the cabin was different. The ghosts were still there, but they had been pushed back into the corners. They were no longer sitting at the table. Levi was all business. The vulnerability of the night, the raw confession, was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "They will come," he said, checking his rifle. "Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. This cabin is strong, built to withstand a heavy snow. It will withstand them." He took the thick planks from the table and began to nail them over the inside of the single window, leaving a narrow, foot-long slit just wide enough to see out of. just wide enough for a rifle barrel. Clara watched him for a moment. He was building a fortress. "What do I do?" she asked. He did not look up from his work. "You will stay in the root cellar. It is under the floorboards, behind the wood pile. It is safe. They will not find you." "No." His hammer stopped. He turned slowly and looked at her. "No," she repeated, her voice shaking but firm. "I will not hide in a hole in the ground. I am done hiding. I am done being helpless." She walked to the wall where his second rifle, an older but still serviceable Spencer, was mounted. She took it down. "You taught me to shoot. Show me how to load. Show me where to stand." Levi stared at her. He saw the woman from the ravine, the terrified, beaten girl, and she was gone. In her place was someone else, someone harder, someone forged in his own fire. A slow, grim smile touched his lips. "All right, you load from the buttstock. It holds 7 rounds. You will stand there by the door. It is the weaker point. You shoot at anything that is not me." For the rest of the morning, they worked. They brought the 2 large water barrels inside. They stacked the ammunition on the table. He showed her how to load the Spencer, again and again, until her fingers, though clumsy, did it without fumbling. She was not a good shot, but she was a second gun. By noon, they were low on supplies. The brawl and his long trip had left the larder thin. They had ammunition, but they were low on flour, salt, and coffee. "We cannot stay here," Levi said, his jaw tight. "We cannot win a siege if we starve first. We have to go to town." Clara's blood ran cold. Harlan, he will be there." "Not in Three Forks. It is further, a full day's ride, but it is bigger. We can get lost. We need the supplies. Clara, we need to go now, before they come back." He went to a large cedar chest at the foot of his cot, one she had never seen him open. He lifted the lid. The smell of cedar and lavender filled the air. He reached inside and pulled something out. It was a dress. It was simple, dark blue calico, with a high neck and long sleeves. It was worn, but immaculately clean. "This was Sarah's," he said, his voice quiet. He held it out to her. "It will be better than trousers. You will look respectable." Clara took the dress, the fabric soft in her hands. It felt like a sacred object. To wear his dead wife's dress. "Levi, I cannot—" "She would have wanted you to be safe," he said, his voice flat, shutting down the emotion. "Go on, put it on. We ride in 10 minutes. They rode hard, pushing the horses. Three Forks was a real town, not a mining camp. It had a church, a bank, and a long main street with 2 competing general stores. It was busy. Wagons and riders kicked up dust. Levi tied their horses in front of the largest store. "Stay close to me. We get what we need, and we get out." Clara stepped onto the boardwalk, her legs shaking. The dress felt foreign, stiff. She was acutely aware of herself, of the way the fabric swished around her ankles. She felt like a fraud. They walked inside. The store was dim, cool, and smelled of pickles, leather, and tobacco. A few men lingered by the stove, though it was warm, and 2 women in fine hats were inspecting bolts of cloth. Everyone looked up when they entered. Levi, tall, bearded, and armed, drew eyes, but it was Clara they stared at. Her hair was pulled back, but her face was too thin, her eyes too large and haunted. She did not look like she belonged. One of the women, her face powdered, whispered something to the other. They both looked at Clara, then quickly looked away, their expressions pinched with disdain. At the far end of the store, a woman leaned against the counter. She wore a bright red, satin dress, her hair piled high, her face painted for the saloons. She was drinking from a small flask. She saw Clara, and her eyes, weary and cynical, traveled up and down. She looked at the simple, handmade dress. She looked at Levi, standing close, his hand near his gun. The woman sneered, her voice loud enough to carry, "You can put a pig in a Sunday dress, but it is still just a pig." Clara froze, the words hitting her like a slap. The shame, The feeling of being unclean washed over her, hot and choking. She wanted to run. Ignore her, Levi growled, pulling her toward the counter where the clerk stood. We need flour, Levi said to the clerk. 50 pounds, and salt, and all the 4470 cartridges you have. But the trouble had started. A drunk man, hearing the saloon girl's words, stumbled out of the saloon next door. He was unshaven, his eyes blurry. He saw Harlan's bounty poster, which was nailed to the post right outside the store. He squinted at it, then at Clara. Hey, he slurred, pointing a grimy finger. That is her. That is the one Harlan was asking about, the $10 whore from Silverknife. He lurched into the store, his eyes alight with a greedy, drunken confidence. He lunged for Clara, grabbing her arm. Come on, girlie, you're coming with me. $10 is a lot of money. Clara screamed. Levi moved. He did not hesitate. He did not warn him. He dropped the bag of salt he was holding and hit the man. It was not a barroom brawl. It was a single, precise, and brutal punch. Levi's fist connected with the man's jaw with a sickening crack. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, hitting the floorboards like a sack of grain. He was out cold. The store went completely silent. The women gasped. The clerk's mouth hung open. Levi threw a $20 gold piece onto the counter. It spun, bright and loud. That covers it. He grabbed Clara's hand. Run! They fled. They ran from the store, vaulted onto their horses, and galloped out of town, leaving the unconscious man on the floor and the stunned silence behind them. They did not stop, did not slow, until they were back in the high hills, back in the safety of their hidden valley. They barred the door. Levi went to the window slit, rifle in hand, scanning the perimeter. Clara sank to the floor, her back against the door. The adrenaline drained away, leaving her hollow. She put her head in her hands and began to cry, her body shaking with deep, agonizing sobs. She was right. Clara wept, her voice muffled. She was right. It does not matter. The dress, this cabin, it does not matter. I will never belong. I will never be clean. They will always look at me and see what I was. I will always be that. I will always be the $10 whore. Levi watched her, his heart twisting. He could kill a dozen men, but he did not know how to fight this. Words were useless. Pity was poison. He walked to the hearth, his mind made up. He took the large copper tub from its hook on the wall. He began to heat water, pot after pot. What are you doing? She asked, her voice thick with tears. Get undressed. He said, What? Get undressed, he repeated, his voice quiet but absolute. You are going to have a bath. She stared at him, confused, but she did what he said. She was too exhausted to fight. She fumbled with the buttons of Sarah's dress, her hands shaking. She stepped out of it, folding it reverently, and stood in her thin chemise. He filled the tub. The small cabin grew warm, humid, the windows fogging. He came to her. He did not look at her with desire. He looked at her with a profound, aching tenderness. He gently, firmly, took the chemise by its straps and pulled it over her head. She stood naked before him, her hands instinctively moving to cover herself. She was so thin, her ribs showing. The scar on her shoulder was a puckered, angry pink. He stopped her hands. He took them, held them at her sides. Stop hiding. He led her to the tub and helped her step in. The water was hot, scalding, but it felt good. She sank down into it, the heat enveloping her. He knelt beside the tub. He took the bar of harsh lye soap. He took a cloth, and he began to wash her. It was a dream. It was a ritual. He washed the dust of the road from her arms. He washed her neck, her shoulders. She was trembling, but she did not pull away. He was reverent. He was slow. Turn around, he whispered. She turned, her back to him. He dipped the cloth in the water and began to wash her back. His fingers, rough and calloused, moved over her skin. She tensed, waiting. His hand stopped. He had reached them. The scars, the long, ropey lines from Madame Eve's whip. They were pale, white, a hideous map on her skin. She began to cry again, silently, the tears dripping into the bath water. He said nothing. He simply put the cloth down. He leaned forward, and in the golden, flickering light of the fire, he pressed his lips to the highest scar, just below her shoulder blade. She gasped, her whole body jerking. He moved lower, his mouth tracing the raised line of ruined skin. He kissed each one, each mark of her shame. He touched with his lips. He was not disgusted. He was anointing them. He was absolving her. "This is not you," he whispered against her skin, his voice thick. "This is their sin. This is their shame, not yours." He finished. He washed her hair, his fingers massaging her scalp, untangling the knots. He was thorough, gentle. He was washing away not just the dirt, but the town, the saloon girl, the madam, the years. He lifted her from the water, his hands strong and sure. He wrapped her in a clean, sun-dried sheet and lifted her into his arms. He carried her to the cot, which was bathed in the warm, dancing light of the fire. He laid her down. He looked at her, wrapped in white, her face clean, her eyes wide, in the golden glow. Her scars, still damp, seemed to fade, to shimmer, to become not marks of shame, but part of the landscape of her. He made love to her. It was not the desperate affirmation of the night before. It was slow and deep and quiet. It was a prayer. He touched her with a reverence that made her ache. He was showing her, not telling her, that she was not ruined. She was not a $10 whore. She was his. The next day, they woke before dawn. The peace of the night held. They were a single, resolved unit. They dressed in silence. They ate a cold breakfast of hardtack. Levi took his post at the boarded window. Clara took hers by the door, the heavy Spencer rifle in her hands. The stock was smooth and cool against her cheek. They waited. The sun rose, painting the high peaks in pink and gold. The valley was silent. An hour passed, then two. Just before noon, Levi spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Riders, on the ridge, 3 of them." Clara's heart leaped, but she did not move. She sighted down the barrel of her rifle, aiming at the empty patch of ground in front of the door. She saw them now. Harlan was in the lead, his dark duster flapping. Beside him was a man so large he made his horse look small. He was broad, thick-necked, with a face like a slab of raw meat. Silas. The third man was a stranger, thin and weasel-like. They were all heavily armed. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, just out of easy rifle range. "They want Clara," Levi said, his voice flat. He cocked his Winchester. The click-clack was the loudest sound in the world. Clara mirrored him, pulling back the hammer on her rifle. The sound was heavy, final. "I am ready," she said. The 3 riders stayed at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the effective range of a pistol. Harlan, Silas, and the third man, a thin, rat-faced man Levi did not recognize, were in a clear argument. Silas, the big man, was gesturing angrily toward the cabin. Harlan was holding him back. "They are waiting us out," Levi said, his voice a low whisper. He had not moved from the window slit. "They think we are trapped. They are wrong." Clara stood by the door, the Spencer heavy in her hands. Her knuckles were white. "What do? We do not let them choose the ground. This cabin is a box. The woods are mine." He looked at her, his eyes cold and clear. "I am going out." "How? The door is the only way." Levi smiled, a grim, thin expression. He walked to the woodpile in the corner, knelt, and pulled aside the stack of logs. Behind it, set into the floor, was a single, wide plank that was not nailed down. He slid it aside, revealing a black, narrow space. "Root cellar. It opens out into the ravine, behind the barn. Where I found you." He checked his pistol, sliding it into his holster. He picked up his knife. "What about me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You are the distraction." He looked at the Spencer. "In 5 minutes, I will be in the trees on the east slope. I want you to fire 1 shot from this window. Not at them. At the tree line above their heads. Make them look here. Make them think I am pinned down. Can you do that? Yes. Her voice was thin, but it was not a question. Do not fire again, not unless they breach that door. You keep this door barred. You understand? She nodded, her throat tight. He looked at her, his face hard, but his eyes softened for a second. He touched her cheek, his thumb rough. Stay alive. Clara. He slipped into the dark hole. She slid the plank back, her hands trembling, and replaced the wood. She was alone. She counted to 300, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She went to the window slit. She saw the 3 men, still arguing. Harlan was passing a bottle. Now. She raised the heavy rifle, aimed high above their heads, and squeezed the trigger. The explosion in the small cabin was deafening, the smell of sulfur sharp and acrid. Outside, the reaction was immediate. The 3 men scattered. Silas and the rat man dove for cover. Harlan spurred his horse back a few yards. They all had their pistols out, aimed at the cabin. They were focused. Clara moved away from the window, her back pressed to the log wall, her heart in her throat. She began, mechanically, to reload the single round. Levi moved like a shadow. He had emerged from the ravine covered in mud and damp earth, a ghost risen from the ground. He circled wide, using the sound of the river to cover his movement. The Spencer shot was his signal. He saw them dive for cover, their eyes glued to the cabin. Fools. They were looking the wrong way. He came up behind the rat-faced man, who was hiding behind a thin pine. Levi did not use his gun. He put his arm around the man's throat from behind, cutting off his air. The man struggled, his boots drumming the earth, but it was silent, brutally efficient. In 10 seconds, the man went limp. Levi laid him on the ground and took his pistol. Silas was behind a large granite boulder. Harlan was still on his horse. "He is in there," Harlan yelled. "He is trapped. Silas, you flush him out." "Go to hell. Harlan, you go flush him out," Silas yelled back. Levi stepped from the trees, 20 yards from Silas's boulder. "He is not in there." Silas spun, his huge body surprisingly fast. He brought his rifle up, but Levi was faster. Levi fired his pistol, not at Silas's chest, but at his shoulder. The shot cracked through the clearing. The rifle flew from Silas's hand as his shoulder exploded in a spray of blood. He roared, a sound of pure animal rage, and stumbled, clutching his arm. Harlan saw it. He saw Levi, covered in mud, standing like an apparition. He saw Silas, disarmed and bleeding. He saw the rat-faced man, unmoving. Harlan was a coward. He did not care about the $10. He cared about his own skin. He yanked his horse's head around, digging his spurs in. "To hell with this!" he screamed. Levi raised his pistol. He had a clear shot at Harlan's back. He squeezed the trigger. Click, the stolen gun was empty. He cursed, drawing his own pistol. But Harlan was already disappearing into the dense line of trees, riding low, galloping hard back toward the trail that led to Silver Knife Gulch. Silas was on his knees, breathing hard, his face pale. Levi walked over to him, his pistol aimed steady. "He is gone," Levi said. He looked at Silas, bleeding in the dirt. He felt nothing, no pity, no anger. He gestured with the gun. "Stay here. You bleed out. You bleed out. You follow me. I will kill you." He walked back to the cabin. Clara heard the shots. One, then silence, then another, then the sound of a horse, riding away at a gallop. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold the rifle. She was pressed against the door, listening. She heard footsteps, slow, steady. "Clara!" It was his voice. She sobbed, her knees weak with relief. She fumbled with the bar, pulling it free. He stood there, covered in mud and pine needles, his face grim. "He is gone. You killed them." "One ran," Levi said, pushing past her into the cabin. He went straight to the ammunition. "Harlan! He is riding back to the gulch, back to the madam, back to the sheriff." Clara's relief vanished, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. "He will bring more men. He will bring everyone." Yes. Oh. Levi was checking his rifle, shoving cartridges into his belt. "We have to run," she said, her voice thin. "We have to go. Now. We can go north, into the high country. He will never find us." Levi snapped the rifle loaded. He looked at her. "No. We are done running. You run from a man like Harlan. You run from a woman like Madame Eve. And they will never stop. They will send men after us for the next 20 years. They will put a price on our heads so high that every bounty hunter from here to Kansas will be on our trail." He slung his saddlebag over his shoulder. "It ends today. In Silverknife." Clara stared at him. "Go back there? Back to that town? Back to that room?" The fear was so profound, so deep, it was paralyzing. She could not breathe. "You stay here," Levi said, his voice hard. "Bar the door. Take the Spencer. You have food and water. I will be back." He moved toward the door. "No." He stopped. He turned. She was shaking. Her face was as white as paper. But her eyes were not the eyes of the victim he had pulled from the ravine. They were the eyes of the woman who had held the bottle to the madam's throat, the woman who had bathed in fire. "No," she said again, her voice stronger. "You said it. I am not running, not anymore. He is coming for me. It is my life. It is my name he is calling." She picked up her own thin blanket and the sack of food she had packed when she tried to flee. "I will not hide here while you fight for me. I am done being helpless. I am going with you." Levi looked at her for a long, silent moment. He saw the terror in her, and he saw the steel beneath it. He was not saving her. She was saving herself. He gave a single, curt nod. "Saddle the mare." The ride to Silverknife Gulch was 4 hours of grim, thundering silence. They pushed the horses hard, not speaking. The rhythmic pounding of the hooves, a drumbeat pulling them toward a final confrontation. Clara rode with the Spencer rifle tucked under her leg. She did not look like the woman who had fled the town weeks ago. She looked like a ghost, riding back to her own grave to settle a debt. They reached the crest of the hill overlooking the gulch as the sun was beginning to sink. The town was a raw, muddy scar in the valley. The sounds drifted up to them. The tinny, relentless piano, the braying of mules, the distant roar of men's laughter. Smoke, tinged yellow with the sulfur from the mines, hung in the air. Clara pulled up her horse. Her body was rigid. Every instinct screamed at her to turn, to flee. Levi stopped beside her. He did not look at her. He just waited. "This is it. Clara, you can wait on this hill. I will not think less of you." She looked at the town. She looked at the sign of the gilded cage, its paint peeling. She remembered the smell of Madame Eve's perfume. She remembered the sound of Silas laughing. She remembered the terror of that back alley. Then she remembered Levi's hands, washing her back. She remembered his voice. "This is not you. This is their sin." "I am not waiting on the hill," she said. They rode down the main street. Their arrival was a lit match to dry tinder. The town stopped. The miners on the boardwalks, their faces grimed with dirt, stopped and stared. The women, leaning from the upper windows of the saloon, went quiet. Every eye in Silverknife Gulch turned to them. They saw Clara, and they saw Levi riding beside her, his face like granite, his rifle resting easy across his saddle. Harlan was there. He stood on the boardwalk in front of the gilded cage, just as she had pictured. He was not alone. The fat-stained vest of Sheriff Brody was beside him, and standing near the bat-wing doors, his arm in a crude, bloody sling, was Silas. His eyes, small and black in his massive face, fixed on Levi with a look of pure, murderous hatred. Levi and Clara dismounted. They did it slowly, deliberately. They tied their horses to the hitching rail, and they walked onto the boardwalk. A figure in a dark green silk dress appeared in the doorway of the saloon. Madame Eve. Her face was pale beneath its thick powder, her hands gripping a lace fan. She saw Clara, and her lips pulled back in a smile that was all teeth. "Well, well," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "The prodigal whore returns. And she has brought her protector. How touching. Levi stepped in front of Clara. We are here for one thing. The paper. The contract. Madame Eve laughed, a high, brittle sound. My dear, foolish man, that paper is my property, just as she is. She fanned herself. But I am a businesswoman. Mr. Harlan tells me you have become attached to my little stray. I am prepared to be generous. You have money. I know you do. You sold your cattle. Her contract is valued at $500. A fair price for damaged goods. Pay me, and you can keep her. I will even have the sheriff draw up a clean bill of sale. Clara felt the world tilt. Bill of sale. Levy did not move. His voice was flat, dead. She is not for sale. Then you are a fool, Madame Eve snapped, her good humor vanishing. And a criminal. Sheriff, arrest this man for assault, and arrest this woman for theft. Sheriff Brody hitched his gun belt, his face sweating. He had 2 deputies behind him, both young, both looking nervous. Now, Levi, Brody blustered. You have caused a lot of trouble. You assaulted Mr. Harlan's associate. You harbored stolen property. And you come riding into my town. Armed. I'm going to have to ask you to hand over your weapons. You and the girl? The deputies fanned out, their hands on their pistols. That is not going to happen. Brody, Levi said. Then I will take them, Silas roared, lunging forward, his good hand reaching for the pistol on his hip. It all happened in a second. Levi moved, not at Silas, but at the nearest deputy. He grabbed the man's gun hand and twisted, slamming him into the other. A shot went wild. Into the dirt. Clara did not wait. She did not freeze. She lunged, not away, but toward the danger. She shoved past Silas, past Harlan, and into the saloon. She was back. The smell of stale beer and cheap perfume hit her. The piano player stopped, his hands frozen above the keys. Gamblers looked up, cards in their hands. Madame Eve, shocked at her sudden move, stumbled back toward the bar. You stupid girl, the madam shrieked. Clara saw the row of whiskey bottles on the back bar. She grabbed one. She did not hesitate. She did not think. She smashed it on the edge of the bar, the glass shattering. She lunged forward, grabbing the front of the madam's silk dress with one hand, and with the other, she shoved the jagged, broken edge of the bottle against the woman's powdered throat. I am not a girl, Clara hissed, her voice a low, vicious rasp she did not recognize. The saloon went dead silent. Outside, Levi had the 2 deputies disarmed and Brody backed against a porch post. Inside, all eyes were on Clara. Madame Eve was frozen. A small trickle of blood, bright red, welled up where the glass pressed into her neck. Her eyes were wide with a terror Clara knew intimately. Clara, the madam whispered, her voice choking. Clara, do not be foolish. The contract, Clara said, her voice shaking but clear. The paper you made me sign, the one you forged. Where is it? It is in the safe, the madam stammered, her hands fluttering at her sides. Get it. I cannot. You are. Tell him, Clara screamed, looking at the terrified bartender. Tell him the combination. It is in my office, the madam cried. At the door, Levi appeared. He had his pistol on the sheriff, pushing him inside. Do what she says. Brody. The sheriff, his face as pale as lard, looked at the madam. Eve, for God's sake, give her the paper. She is going to kill you. My office, the madam whimpered. Clara did not release her. She dragged her, the broken bottle never leaving her throat. She pushed her toward the stairs, toward the small, curtained office at the back of the landing. Levi covered the room, his pistol never wavering from the sheriff. Harlan and Silas stood in the doorway, blocked by the crowd of miners. Unsure what to do, the power had shifted. The safe, Clara commanded. The madam, sobbing, fumbled with the dial on the small, black safe hidden behind a painting. It clicked open. She pulled out a stack of papers. Which one? Clara snarled. This one! This one! The madam pulled a single, flimsy piece of paper from the stack. It had Clara's name on it, and a crude X beside it. Clara snatched it. She looked at the paper that had defined her, that had chained her, that had cost her years of her life. She turned to Levi. He was at the bottom of the stairs, his gun still on the sheriff. The entire town was watching. "Burn it," Levi said to the sheriff. "What?" "The stove," Levi said, gesturing with his pistol. "There is a fire in it. Burn the paper." The sheriff looked at Madame Eve, who was weeping, and at Clara, who looked like a goddess of vengeance. Her face streaked with dirt, the bloodied bottle still in her hand. He took the paper. He walked to the pot-bellied stove in the center of the saloon. He opened the hatch. He threw it in. They watched it catch. The paper curled, the ink turning brown, then black, then it vanished into a fragile, gray ash. It was done. A voice from the back of the room, a miner with a face like a dried apple, spoke. "Sweet Lord, she is free." A murmur went through the crowd. It was not hostile. It was supportive. They had all lived under Madame Eve's thumb, under the sheriff's corruption. They had just watched a barefoot, haunted girl tear it all down. Harlan and Silas saw the shift. They were not bounty hunters now. They were just two men in a room full of people who suddenly hated them. They began to back away. From the top of the stairs, another figure appeared. A young girl, no older than 16, her face bruised, her dress torn. She had been watching from the shadows. She looked at Clara, who stood, her arm finally dropping, the bottle falling to the floor with a crash. The girl saw her chance. She bolted. She ran down the stairs, past Levi, past the stunned sheriff, and out the bat-wing doors. She ran into the street, a small, desperate figure running for her life. Madame Eve screamed, "Stop her! Stop that girl!" But no one moved. The control was broken. The spell was shattered. Levi grabbed Clara's hand. "Now!" They backed out of the saloon. The crowd of miners and drinkers parted for them, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. Harlan and Silas were gone. Madame Eve was on her knees, sobbing over her lost property. The sheriff just stood by the stove, his hands empty, watching his power burn to ash. Levi and Clara walked onto the boardwalk. They untied their horses. They mounted, and they rode. Not at a gallop, but at a walk. Straight down the center of the street, past the staring faces, and out of Silver Knife Gulch. They did not look back. They rode until the sun came up. They rode until the sounds of the gulch were a distant memory, until the air smelled of pine and clean water. They rode until the horses were lathered and their own bodies were numb with an exhaustion so deep it felt like lead in their bones. When the sky was a bright, clean pink, they stopped by a river, the same river where he had shown her his scars. Clara slid from the mare. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the damp earth. The adrenaline finally, completely, gone. She was shaking from head to toe. She put her face in her hands and began to cry. It was not the weeping of grief. It was the harsh, ragged, tearing sob of release. Levi dismounted and knelt beside her. He did not touch her. He just waited. She finally looked up, her face a mess of tears and mud. "It is over," she whispered. "It is over," he confirmed. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his face. She touched the hard line of his jaw, the rough stubble of his beard. "You came back for me," she said. You saved me. In the ravine. In the cabin. You saved me." "We saved each other," he said, his voice rough. "No," she said, her voice fierce. She grabbed the front of his shirt. "You do not understand. I was dead. I was a ghost. I was just a thing in a room, waiting to be used. I was nothing. You gave me back me." His eyes, those pale, clear eyes, were locked on hers. He saw her. He did not see the whore. He did not see the victim. He saw the woman who had held a bottle to a monster's throat. He pulled her to him. It was not gentle. It was not tender. It was a collision. His mouth found hers, and it was a kiss of raw, desperate, agonizing truth. It was the kiss of two people who had walked through hell and found each other on the other side. They collapsed together on the riverbank, a tangle of exhausted limbs and frantic hands. They tore at each other's dusty, sweat-soaked clothes, needing to feel skin, to feel the undeniable, solid proof of life. This was not the gentle reverence of the firelight. This was not the desperate affirmation in the cabin. This was a triumph. It was a raw, physical, elemental claiming. It was the most powerful moment of connection they had ever shared. His hands were on her scars, and they were not marks of shame, they were marks of victory. Her hands were on his, and they were the armor of a man who had finally stopped running from his own fire. It was physically intense. It was emotionally raw. It was unforgettable. As the sun rose higher, painting the river in gold, they lay wrapped together, breathing, their bodies finally, completely, at peace. They were not ruined. They were forged. They returned to the valley. After the noise, the filth, and the fear of Silver Knife Gulch, the homestead felt like a cathedral. The silence was not empty. It was full of the sound of running water, the call of a hawk high overhead, and the smell of pine and damp earth. Peace settled over them. A heavy, warm blanket. It was a new sensation, this absence of a threat. For weeks, they did not look to the ridge for riders. They did not wake with their hands reaching for a gun. They simply were. Spring arrived in a sudden, violent rush of green. The snow vanished from all but the highest peaks, and the valley floor became a carpet of new grass and wildflowers. The air was soft, promising. Clara found a patch of rich, dark earth near the cabin, where the sun hit most of the day. She had found a small, forgotten sack of seeds in the root cellar, beans, squash, and corn. She took Levi's spade, and for the first time in her life, she broke ground with the intent to grow. She spent her mornings there, on her knees, her hands in the dirt. The soil was cool and rich, clinging to her fingers, lodging beneath her nails. It felt clean. It felt real. Every seed she pushed into the earth was a small, stubborn act of faith. It was a declaration. She was not just a survivor. She was a planter. She was putting down roots, claiming a future that was not defined by what had been done to her, but by what she chose to build. Levi would watch her from a distance, a strange, quiet look on his face. He was a man who had seen his own crops burn. To see her kneeling in the dirt, coaxing life from it, stirred something in him he had thought long dead. It was hope, a fragile, green shoot, pushing its way up through the ash of his past. One morning, he did not ride out to check his snares. He walked over to her, his shadow falling across the neat rows she had made. She looked up, her face smudged with dirt, her hair loose around her shoulders. She smiled, an easy, unguarded smile. It was a look that still, after all this time, had the power to stop his heart. He said nothing. He just picked up the second spade and began to dig beside her. A few days later, Levi began to build. He chose a spot 50 yards from the main cabin, on a small, flat rise that overlooked the creek. He began felling trees, his axe blows echoing through the valley. Clara was confused. Another cabin? Are you sending me away? The old fear that she was temporary, that she was a burden, was a snake that was hard to kill. He stopped his work, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his arm. He looked at her. Then at the foundation he had begun to lay. It is not for separation. Clara, it is for more. He struggled with the words, as he always did. He was a man of action, not explanation. This place, it is just one room. A man needs a place to work, a place for what comes next. He was not building a wall. He was building an addition. He was building a home, not just a shelter. He was planning for a future that included her, a future that was larger than the two of them. Huddled together for warmth, he was defying his curse. He was laying foundations, daring the fire to come. She understood. She picked up a smaller log, dragging it toward him. Then you will need help. They worked together, falling into a new rhythm. He taught her how to notch the logs, how to mix the mud and straw for chinking. Her hands, once soft and then scarred, grew strong and calloused. They were the hands of a pioneer, the hands of a woman who was building her own home. with her own partner. The second cabin rose log by log, a solid, physical testament to their shared future. It was not a house. It was a homestead. Their peace was interrupted one afternoon by the sound of a horse. It was not a strong, confident rider, but something hesitant, stumbling. Levi had his rifle in his hand before the rider even cleared the trees. It was a girl, the girl from the saloon, the one who had run. She was on a stolen, broken-down mule, and she looked half-starved. She saw Levi, and her face went white with terror. She tried to turn the mule, but the animal simply stopped, its head hanging. "Please," the girl whispered, her voice cracking. She looked to be no more than 16. "Please, I saw her, the woman with the bottle. I heard what she did." She looked past Levi and saw Clara, standing on the porch of the new cabin. The girl slid from the mule and fell to her knees. "I got nowhere. They will find me. Please, I will work. I will do anything. Do not send me back." Clara walked down to her, her heart aching. She saw herself in the girl's terrified eyes, in her bruised face, in the cheap, torn dress. This was the first echo of her new life. She knelt in the dirt, just as Levi had knelt for her. "What is your name?" "Eliza." The girl wept. "You are safe here, Eliza," Clara said, her voice firm. "You will not be sent back, ever." Eliza had not come alone. She had a friend, another girl named Sarah, who was younger, barely 14, hidden in the woods a mile back. Levi rode out and found her, a small, shivering thing hiding in a hollow log. He brought her back, slung over the front of his saddle, her eyes wide with disbelief. The cabin was full. Clara and Levi moved into the new, larger cabin. They gave the old one to the girls. Clara taught them what Levi had taught her: how to mend clothes, how to grind coffee, how to shoot the Spencer. She taught them how to plant and how to heal. She was not just their protector. She was their example. She was proof that escape was possible. She was proof that life could begin again. The four of them became a strange, wounded, but functioning family. The presence of the girls changed the valley. It was no longer a silent refuge. It was loud. There was laughter. Sometimes, there were also nightmares. Clara would often wake in the night to a scream from the other cabin. She would go, sit with Eliza or Sarah, hold their hands, and tell them what Levi had told her. "You are safe." It was a dream. She was healing them. And in healing them, she was healing the last, deepest parts of herself, the girl's stories, so similar to her own. Relit the cold fire of her anger. She had saved 2. How many were left? How many girls were still trapped? Not just in Silver Knife Gulch, but in 100 camps just like it? She had learned to read and write from her mother, long ago. Her skills were rusty, but they were there. She found the last of Levi's paper and his ink. She sat at the small table, while the others slept, the cabin lit by a single candle. She began to write. She did not write a plea for help. She wrote a testament. She wrote with a cold, clear fury. She wrote about Madame Eve. She wrote about the contracts. She wrote about the complicity of men like Sheriff Brody. She wrote about the girls, their names, their ages, the way they were broken. She did not write as a victim. She wrote as a witness. She did not sign her own name. She signed it, a woman of Silver Knife. She gave the letter to a freight driver Levi trusted, a man who ran a route to Helena, the territorial capital. She asked him to give it to the editor of the Helena Daily Herald. She gave him $5 of the money Levi had, a fortune, to ensure it was delivered. She did not know if it would be printed. She did not know if anyone would read it. But she had to do it. She had to take the small, quiet power she had and hurl it at the world. It was her bottle smashed on the bar for all the world to see. A month later, the freight driver returned. He brought them flour, coffee, and a folded, ink-smudged copy of the Herald. Her letter was on the front page. It had caused a firestorm. The editor, a man with a crusading spirit, had seized on it. He had printed it in full, alongside a scathing editorial about the moral rot in the mining camps. There was talk of a territorial marshal being dispatched. There was talk of a citizens' committee. Clara's hands shook as she read it. Her voice, her quiet, angry words, had shaken the world. She looked at Levi, her eyes full of a new, strange power. He nodded, a look of profound, quiet pride on his face. She had found a weapon stronger than his rifle. That night, she was restless. She could not sleep. She went outside, into the cool, silver light of the full moon. The valley was beautiful, a bowl of silver and shadows. The two cabins were dark, asleep. She felt content. It was a feeling so deep and so new. It was almost frightening. She heard him come up behind her. He did not touch her, just stood beside her. They looked at the mountains, their jagged peaks cutting into the starry sky. "You did a good thing, Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We did," she corrected. He was quiet for a long time. He seemed awkward, his usual steady calm disrupted. He fiddled with something in his hands. "This valley," he said, gesturing to the world around them. "It is good land, but it is not ours. Not really. I have been thinking." She waited, her heart starting a slow, heavy beat. "I have been thinking about that land to the west, the high prairie. It is open, good for cattle, good for a real ranch." He turned to her, and in the moonlight, she could see his face was tight with an emotion she could not read. A man should not build a life on land that is not his. He should not ask." He stopped. He was fumbling. This man who could face down 3 gunmen was afraid of a few simple words. He took her hand. He pressed something into her palm. It was small, round, and warm from his skin. She looked down. It was a ring, carved from a piece of dark, polished cottonwood. It was smooth, simple, and perfect. "Levi," she whispered, I do not have, Sarah's ring is gone." He stammered, the words painful for him. I made this. It is not gold. "Levi, what are you asking me?" she said, her voice trembling. He let out a long breath. He looked her square in the eyes, his own gaze fierce and vulnerable. "I am asking you to be my wife, Clara. I am asking you to build that life with me, to put your name on a piece of paper, with me, and make it mean something. To be my partner, in all of it." She had expected her life to be many things. Brutal, short, and full underscore pain. She had never, not once, expected it to be this. She looked at the man before her, this scarred, broken, and impossibly good man, who was offering her his name, his future, his life. She began to cry. The tears were not the hot tears of her past. They were quiet, warm tears of a joy so profound, so complete. It left her speechless. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choking. "Yes, Levi, yes." He did not shout. He did not celebrate. He just took the ring from her palm, his own rough, calloused hands shaking, and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then he pulled her to him, burying his face in her hair, and held her, his body trembling, as if she were the only solid thing in a spinning world. They were married 3 days later. There was no preacher. There was no town. They walked, hand in hand, with Eliza and Sarah trailing behind them, to the edge of the valley, where a lone, ancient cottonwood tree stood. Its leaves were a shimmering, whispering cloud of green in the summer breeze. They stood beneath it. The birds in the mountains were their only witnesses. Levi did not have practiced vows. He held her hands, the wooden ring stark and beautiful on her finger. "Clara," he said, his voice thick, his eyes never leaving hers. "I have been a ghost for a long time. I was a man made of ash. You were the first thing that felt real. You are my anchor. You are my home. My life is yours. What I build for you. Where I go with you. I am your husband. I swear it." She was crying again, but she did not look away. "Levi," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I was a thing. I was broken. I was nothing. You found me. You did not fix me. You let me heal. You showed me what strength was. You gave me back my name. You gave me back myself. My heart is yours. My body is yours. By my own choice, my life is bound to yours. I am your wife. I swear it." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. It was gentle, and it was absolute. Eliza and Sarah clapped, their quiet applause the only sound. They were married. That night, they were in their cabin, the one they had built together. The girls were asleep across the way. A warm summer breeze came through the open window, carrying the scent of pine. The fire in the hearth was low, casting a gentle, amber light. They came together. There was no urgency. There was no desperation. There was no need for claiming, or healing, or forgiving. It was just love. It was a slow, familiar, and profoundly emotional unfolding. He undressed her slowly, and she him. The firelight played across their bodies, across the landscape of their pasts. His hands, which she now knew as well as her own, traced the whip scars on her back. They were no longer hidden in the dark. They were not things to be ashamed of. They were just her, part of the woman he had married. He kissed them, not with pity, but with a familiar, husbandly tenderness. She touched the star-shaped scar on his chest, the one from the Union bullet. She traced the long, faded lines on his torso. They were just him, the man she loved. Their final love scene was gentle. It was a conversation spoken in touch. It was the comfort of a shared life, of a known body, of a future that was no longer a question, but a certainty. The firelight did not hide their scars. It celebrated them. It illuminated them. It showed them for what they were, the proof that they had survived, and the map of how they had found each other. They were not two broken halves, but two whole, scarred, and strong individuals, choosing to be one. They lived in the valley for the rest of the summer. Into the autumn, they taught the girls. They harvested the small, miraculous crop from Clara's garden. They watched the world change, but Levi was right. The valley was a refuge, but it was not a home. One morning, when the aspen leaves had turned a brilliant, burning gold, they packed. They loaded 2 mules with supplies. They gave the homestead, both cabins, the garden, and the rest of their tools to Eliza and Sarah. "You are safe here," Clara told them, hugging them both. "You know how to shoot. You know how to live. This is yours now. You are not runaways. You are homesteaders." The girls cried, but they stood tall. They were not the terrified children they had been. They were young women. Levi and Clara mounted their horses. They looked at the valley one last time. It had been their sanctuary. It had been their crucible. They turned their horses west, toward the high, open prairie, toward the lands they would claim as their own. They rode side by side, their shadows long in the morning sun. They were not fleeing. They were claiming. They rode in silence for an hour, the world opening up before them, a vast, empty, and promising land. Levi looked over at her. She was sitting tall in her saddle, her face turned toward the horizon. He could not, for the life of him, see the woman he had pulled from the ravine. He saw only his wife. "You afraid?" he asked, his voice quiet. Clara turned to him. The wind caught her hair, pulling it back from her face. The old, haunted fear was gone from her eyes. In its place was a bright, steady, and unbreakable calm. She smiled, a slow, sure smile that lit her entire face. "No," she said, "not anymore." Thank you for listening to this story. I truly appreciate you spending your time with Levi and Clara. We would love to hear from you. Please comment and let us know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories like this one. Your thoughts mean a great deal, so please share them with us in English. We read every one.